Hey, good morning. Welcome. We've heard a lot lately about these deep reasoning models, R1 and O3 and so many others that have been out there. But what about deep research? And by the way, it's not necessarily the same thing. They can have overlaps, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So Google has a Gemini version that they call Deep Research. We'll talk about today. Stanford University has something called Storm. We'll also talk about how that's developing and how they lean on Bing and OpenAI models as well. OpenAI also has things that would qualify as deep research. So if you're not just necessarily trying to get to a deep reasoning where you're trying to move step by step, but you really just want, well, let's call it what it is. If you're a student and you wanted an AI to write a research paper for you, with appropriate citations, not like Reddit or Wikipedia, where are you going to go for that and which tool is actually working the best? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be focusing on Storm, Gemini's deep research, as well as what Perplexity can do right now, and talk about where they can compare and contrast, where there's benefits and not. So that's the goal for today. Today is the Daily AI Show. Today is February 6th, 2025. I'm joined by Beth and Andy. I'm Brian. And yeah, this is going to be a good conversation. I was saying just before we went live that, this is not this conversation costs. Because to go in and use some of these models at the moment, Gemini's deep research, you can get it for free. If you've never tried Gemini Advanced before, you can get it for free for a month. I had already tried Gemini Advanced, so I didn't fall into that bucket. But they luckily did have a first 2 months for $9.99, and then in May it would go up to $19.99. So wanted to make sure we had that and we had stuff to talk about. Beth and Andy, I don't know if you ran into that issue as well, but that was a difficult one to sort of overcome here, and then dealing with some issues with things running and failing and stuff. It took a little bit to get to this conversation today, but I'm ready. I have a few to talk about. What was your guys' experience like as you were doing research with us?
Well, go ahead.
But I have advanced because it's attached to the Daily AI Show, Drive archive. So, and I honestly thought that, it was available in AI Studio because I remember that we used it before, but no, we used it before because I used it in advanced.
Right.
And I think it's important to let people know what's available, even if it's not free, but yes. Um, yeah.
To be fair, Perplexity, the version of Perplexity I'm using isn't free either. So fair is fair. I already pay $20, or actually I think I said I paid the annual subscription for
Yeah.
Perplexity. So I paid already for a year's worth of Perplexity use. So to be fair, when we're talking today, apples to apples,
Right.
Storm is free. Storm is free, but Perplexity and Gemini do cost, at least unless you've never used Gemini. Like I said, you can get the free month out of it. Then you
Right.
And let's not forget that OpenAI's deep research tool is now available at a high cost if you're a pro user and paying $200 a month, you have access to it today. But the good news is that the advanced capabilities of the O3 models, reasoning and iterative research, uh, or academic and or deep STEM related research projects that you may be pursuing in your spare time, all those things will be available to Plus users at the $20 a month level. And many of you are already paying that. So these tools will become available, but seems for the moment, the Gemini tool, which is very good, is not available unless you're paying for their advanced, and that's $20 a month.
Right. Although
Go ahead.
we should say, that, so you, Andy, have Perplexity because you used it before you bought the rabbit, but you're currently, using Perplexity because you got a year free with Rabbit, right?
That's right. Yeah, I got my first year free, but we're past that now.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, so
Over a year ago?
I know, what?
paid for it over a year.
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah, so I got access to Perplexity Pro for a year ago. Yeah, but I would never give up my Perplexity Pro subscription. This is really an important point with respect to research, because one of the advances that's come about because of Gemini's um, thinking capabilities and multimodal capabilities is that the deep research that's done by Gemini Advanced using the full Flash, not, I'm sorry, not the Flash version, but the full Gemini 2.0 model, um, coupled with the extensive index of web sources that Google has access to, is that you have this combination of an agentic reasoning model thinking through all of the steps it needs to take in order to discover all the facets of the question that you want to have analyzed ultimately from multiple sources in this research paper that you're doing. But Perplexity has that same kind of research capability, and it allows you to choose either O3 Mini, which is OpenAI's reasoning model, or DeepSeek R1, a very good reasoning model. You can use either one of those in concert with the retrieval and collection of the sources that you want to be compiled into an answer. Now, it's my experience with Perplexity is it's not gonna develop a formatted, research paper ready to deliver to your PhD advisor. That's you wanna lean on OpenAI's O3 and their deep research tool if you want that, or Google. But Perplexity is faster and it's very complete, and it's gonna deliver you all the answers you want, but in a condensed, compact form, and then you can interact with the underlying model and ask it further, exploratory questions about the research that's been developed. I'll just
So that's interesting. Before you jump, I just wanna finish the point that I was, starting to make, which is that both of these companies, Google and Perplexity, have made deals with other things that you have, so check. Like, if you want Google Advanced, or Gemini Advanced, Brian's telling you that you could get 2 months for, $9.99 before it goes up. I think that my cell phone bill came from Verizon and said, "Hey, do you know that you could get, like, Gemini?" So, like, look around. You but my point is you may have access to this in something that you're already paying for, and, it's worth it. Check it out for a month or
And again, we'll talk about it. Storm is free research project, and they want you to use it because they're trying to gather research back on it, and you have to agree to their research. When you go to use Storm, you have to agree to their research guidelines and criteria. So you are basically saying like I'm telling you you can use my data, you can use my search criteria. It asks a follow-up question on why this is important to you before you do it, because that's exactly what it is. Now the great part about that is you are getting a highly competent. I can show you two different examples where it's highly competent model and you're not paying a dime for it. You're just signing in other than trading, the ability for them to train on the data you're using. And of course you got to be careful with that. But if we're talking about let's just talk about some topics you want to do. Now, if you're in education, or if you're a student currently and you're writing papers, yes, there's some really easy ones in terms of by the way, with Storm, it can only be up to 20 words, which does make it a little complicated. You have to be really succinct with what you're asking for it to do research on. But for instance, you might want to compare and contrast two different eras of Roman Empire, right? Or two different Caesars, during that time or something that's history based, been written on a lot. There's probably more than enough research articles and quality articles on the internet already. It's something that happened yeah, centuries ago, and historians have written on it, and there's probably a lot of fact that could be pulled back. So if you're a student and you were saying, I need to write a paper on this and I need to get started on it. And I'm not suggesting anybody bluntly copy and paste or do that stuff. But if you needed to get started with it and read a research paper to help you get started with it and look at citations, well then two of the three models. I can't really speak for OpenAI because I don't have a $200 plan, so I can't say what their deep research is. And again, I want to keep it separate from reasoning, just to think about deep research because they are a little different. They overlap, but they're a little different. But if you were to do that, I think Gemini does a very good job, and I actually think Storm does a very good job. Perplexity, to your point, Andy, I have nothing bad to say about Perplexity, but you are going to get a distinctively different answer. And it really is more of a summary. And there's the ability, obviously, Perplexity does a phenomenal job with follow-up questions. It could be better in some cases for a student where you don't need a full research paper presented to you, but you need to get sort of the highlights so you know where to go next. And you can dig right into the citations that Perplexity did. And of course, if you didn't understand what it came back with, there's multiple ways to keep talking to the model. So good for research on that side of it. But then there's something we have to talk about, which is quality of sources. So that can make or break a good research paper. If you're going to take a research paper and submit it anywhere, even if you said it was written by AI, its merit's going to be based on the quality of the sources that it found. Way back in the day when Wikipedia was early on or whatever, that was the first thing that any teacher would say is if you dare to look at Wikipedia, and use it as a source, you'll get an F, right? Even back in college, I remember that. Now my daughter says it's like Reddit and, also Wikipedia and stuff. And I always tell her like, no, don't source Wikipedia. Go find where Wikipedia got the citations and then look at those citations and then decide if that's your source. So we were having that conversation not too long ago. So, what are the quality of the sources? And I do think in the two examples I ran, I do see a difference in the sources that are cited. I will say in both examples, I got approximately 30 citations. And that really is what the definition is of like a deep research. A deep research is what it sounds like. It's going to go beyond 2, 3, 4, cited sources, which is what you would originally have gotten in like a chat GPT. Now it's gotten better with its advanced research. But the idea here is that it's digging through, hopefully, multiple quality sourced, citations. And so that's really when I looked at these and I said, how are we going to evaluate the responses we're getting? We can certainly pull them up on screen. That's obviously one thing I wanted to make sure that there was a focus on was quality of citations.
Let me point out that it's not just the quality and the number of sources that you can retrieve, but it's also the context window of the model to assemble all of that and actually consider it all at the same time as it's generating the final output. And clearly, Gemini is way ahead on that with their million to 2 million context window. My guess is that deep research would bring back more resources and be able to comprehend more resources in doing its thing. But I haven't tried it because all I have really is Ethan Mollick's comparison between OpenAI's deep research for a PhD level research paper. And he compared it directly and provided examples of the output on his LinkedIn post. And I read both of them and I found like he felt that the output coming from O3 deep research was better, was like a real top level PhD student research assistant that he had, and that Google's research was comprehensive, but not iterative and wasn't possessed of the sort of reasoning analysis that it uncovered different angles on the research that he found really gratifying in the result from OpenAI. But I read both of the outputs and I thought Google's was really good. And it brought back many more resources in assembling the result. And I think that's one of the advantages that you will see. And the other main advantage of Google is you probably already have access to Google. And for a mere $20 a month, you can have access to their most advanced models and deep research. And that means that Gemini is going to work seamlessly with your Google Sheets, with your Google Docs. You can have the output of that delivered directly into those things. Where if you're using one of the other tools, you're going to have to kind of migrate it into, and I use Google Docs a lot for this purpose. So I'm kind of bouncing back and forth without a subscription to Gemini Advanced, which I may eventually have to bite the bullet for just because I work in the Google workspace.
Yeah. And I mean, look, that's going to be a big deal with all the different tools, right? It's like Microsoft wants you to play with Copilot, and people are going to bend to that because they're a Microsoft house. And Google, same thing. I mean, I've said this at scale where we use Google Workspace, same thing, Andy, and I do at home as well. And so you're right to that. Like if it gets good enough where it's able to um use the deep research to expand on Google Docs that I've already written, put things together for, or, presentations or whatever, that does start to have less moving pieces starts to mean something. And one call out I wanted to make too is just so people are aware with Google's deep research, after you give it its first prompt, and I might be able to show this, it comes back and tells you what the plan is before it runs the plan. Perplexity doesn't do that. Storm doesn't do that from Stanford. They just go off and do. But Gemini is a much more human interaction where it says, I hear you, and this is what I heard. This is the plan. And then you have an option. You can say keep go, or you can say modify. And then if you modify, it doesn't make it an edited form. It basically says, what parts do you feel like we need to improve upon? And so now we're in a conversation with me and Gemini saying, well, I liked 4, 5, and 6. And by the way, it lays it out very easy to read. It'll say, we're going to reference back to point number 7 when we do this. And so you can see the whole research concept of what's about to happen before it happens. And I think that's really helpful because if you're doing this type of research and you're trying to save time, you might catch an error early on because of the way you prompted, and it confused the model or whatever, and it gives you an opportunity to catch those mistakes early and get the model moving in the right direction from the first go. Obviously, from a compute standpoint, from a price standpoint, that's going to be valuable too if you're going through like APIs. But I do like that side of it, and Perplexity, at least the Storm side of it, don't have that.
So one of the things that I noticed in doing the research with Google is what I think is a really big missing opportunity. Like it's just a side thing for this show, but I feel like I need to mention it because Google, why can I open this in Google in Docs but not in Notebook LM?
Mm.
Right? I have 40 websites that you searched. I have a report. I would like to have a podcast on it, right? Like
Yeah.
I would like to do this kind of thing. Um, the the and that would then I think pull it into for me kind of more superiority to Perplexity because then you would have this other way that you could engage in it, right? Perplexity has spaces, you can move threads in, you can do all kinds of research with that. In a space, you can add your context for, like you can add your docs that you want it to pull from, so you can build up that repository of knowledge. To my knowledge, I know Gemini has, gems, which are more like custom GPTs, but Notebook LM is kind of like the Perplexity space, right? Where you really can both do outside research and start building up your repository of inside research, which is actually something that students do, or PhDs do when they're doing research.
Yeah, for that matter, I agree with you that Perplexity is a huge value with its spaces and projects because, let's say the four of us collectively agreed that we're going to learn and use LangChain and LangFlow, right? Not something that, well, I don't know. None of us probably could do it right off the bat. I've had a little experience with it. We talked about it on the show, but somebody says, well, I'll start it in Perplexity. And so, Beth, you go in and you start doing some basic research just to get us going. And then maybe you come back to the three of us and you say, well, there's some information now. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Just go into the spaces and look what it is. And then, Karl may come in after that. By the way, Karl's with us. Karl may come in after that and say like, well, I added a few extra parts and pieces to it because I asked a couple questions. And me and Andy go back in and you go back in, Beth, and we look at it. So from a collaborative standpoint, I really do like what Perplexity has. It's very easy to use and sort of build up that knowledge collectively together. Obviously, you could do it separately as well, but it is a big tool for that as well. Um, do you guys want me to share? I'll do one of the easier of the two use cases, and then I have a harder one because I really tried to stress test it a bit. But the first one that I did was actually just about daylight savings time. I'm not quite sure why that jumped into my head. I guess it's coming up pretty soon, and I'm a target of wanting to keep daylight savings time for the entire year, but it's not as cut and dry as that. So let's just look really quickly at some of the things we got from it. And so the first up here, when it comes up on screen, is going to be Perplexity. And so, yeah, exactly what you think is going to happen here. Research the origins of daylight savings time and provide a paper making a compelling argument for making it permanent in the United States. And I had to vary this a little bit again because of word count with Storm. I'll show you what I did there. And so I've expanded this a little bit. You see, this is pro, by the way. So this is the paid side of it. It came back with 32 sources, which is, we could comparatively, we can consider that to be deep research based on what the other models will do as well. And then what we would have to really do is go in here and really look at what these sources are, other than just like highlighting here, Spectrum local news. Okay. Country living. All right. Maybe, we really have to look at these different sources and decide if we think there's some value in there. Now, this is an opinion piece. So it's going to research and find opinions that are out there on the web. So it's not wrong for doing it. And then our result here is going to be a little bit more succinct, some general overall information, some, the advantages. Obviously did write it as a paper. I asked it just in case to see what it would do. Address the concerns, conclusion. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. And of course we could have done our follow-up here. So Perplexity is about what we would expect. So now let's jump over to, this is Storm, or CoStorm is another model that they have. Now, this is by Stanford University. You can go look this up and use Storm for free. The only thing I had to do is log in with my Google account. I probably could have used a different email if I wanted to, but that was what the option was. And then I had to agree to their terms of service. This is a research project. So they actually have Storm and CoStorm. What you're looking at right now is Storm, and I'll show you the difference with CoStorm, but it's basically the same information. On the side here, we can see what the mind map is of the different areas that it pulled back for this conversation. And again, we're getting really good, information about it. And what you do for here for cited sources is you just click on it and you can see where this is coming from. This is coming from Britannica.com. This next one is timeanddate.com. That seems pretty relevant. This one is from worldtimesaver.com and so on and so forth. So you'd have to go through again. This one is pretty well written out. This one definitely feels more like a research paper, but again, that is its intent. So I like the way this is written out. I found it to be fairly easy to read. It wasn't like, word salad or anything like that. And you get the health benefits, the role of public opinion. So more than Perplexity, but not necessarily better or worse. And then finally here we have Gemini's deep research. So again, this is under Gemini's advanced. You might get a free trial for that. I paid for it so I could use it for this the show. And this is what I was talking about earlier that is different from the other two. Now I'm not sure about O1's because that's maybe Karl, you can talk to that. But like what you get here before it starts, you can actually see it here. The two options I had, which was edit plan or start research, but it tells me exactly what it's about to do based on my query, which was the same. Research daylight savings time, compelling argument for making it permanent in the United States. And then it goes through and it says, one, I'm going to find the origins of it. I'm going to find the advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to find research papers of the impact of daylight savings time. I'm going to find countries that have made it permanent, which I thought was really interesting that it was like, I'm going to go find where this is already being done so I could bring that into the conversation. Find public opinion polls based on the above information. This is kind of what you were talking about, Andy, where this is not static. This is saying, I'm going to do all of this and then chain of thought. When I have all of that, I'm going to do number 6 here, which is based on the above information. Write a paper making a compelling argument for making it done. So then it says analyzing, create a report, ready in a few minutes. And it did. It took maybe 3 minutes for this to run, I would say. I told it to run just the way it was. And then it says, feel free to ask me follow-up questions or request changes based on it. So you could basically do the same thing as Perplexity where we could continue the conversation. And then again, same thing, we get um, our research paper here. And there's some little like drop down arrows that talk about like learn more, some areas. It did bring in some stuff from Wikipedia. I don't know if that's necessarily wrong in this particular case for what I asked. But again, we would have to go back and look at it. Comparative to Storms, out of the 3, I like Gemini's the best. That's just a personal opinion. You can see all the different websites here, an easy read of everywhere it went from the defense.gov and short history and so on and so forth. So everything is there. It's pretty easy to work through. And then as Beth pointed out, you can hit open in docs here at the top and immediately bring that into a Google Doc, which is very, very handy. The only thing I didn't mention before I stop share here back on, I said I was going to show you the other side of it. This is back on Storm. And then remember I said there's Storm and Co-Storm. Co-Storm is like a back and forth conversation with like a moderator. So you can see it here. This moderator is an interesting topic. Here we go. This is where I was looking for. Background discussion moderator. It's asking some questions and it sort of breaks it up into a moderator and an expert. It's the same information and you can toggle before the two of you. You don't have to run it a second time, but it's a different way of consuming the information. I think this is actually really valuable. I totally understand why Stanford built this because I think this could be very, very helpful for a student going back and forth. And then all the way at the bottom here, you can keep going. So you can keep having follow and says, join the conversation down here. So now kind of like Perplexity, kind of like Gemini, but I can just be curious and I can join this AI conversation going on about the topic and dive deeper into some sections or otherwise. And you can see it still gives you all the same citations along the way. So that's my first example. And then I did a deeper one with a much more complex topic, but thoughts on that at the moment.
That is much more in terms of Storm than I, had played with, and first of all, I thought that the round table would be more than just a moderator and the person mimicking the person asking the question or the expert, but I also see huge opportunities for that, right? In the agentic expert kind of conversation. Like there's so much in terms of um like imagine like, okay, co-storm, yay, I've done this. Now what I'd really like is to have a Socratic discussion with the two that you've already got there, and then I'd like to bring these other pieces in. Like that starts to get really exciting because it's a mixture of experts, but it's a mixture of experts you choose. Right? Like, it kind of feels like and I'm riffing off this. This is not what CoStorm does today. Somebody will make this happen or maybe you'll be able to do it yourself. But it feels a little like the if you could have any 6 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would you choose and what would you talk about? Right? Like, I find that really that's very exciting about AI.
It kind of goes to what Andy was saying too about like what Ethan Mollick was saying about he liked some of the other angles that it was bringing. Well, he was referring to Gemini, I think, but regardless, yeah, you could almost see like somebody who's researching this going in and using that round table to have that kind of discussion, like you were saying, Beth. I mean, no, I can't bring in other people at the moment, but still to have the moderator and the expert and be able to quote unquote join the conversation and say, well, I don't really understand this, or like I see what you're saying, but could you break this down and make this easier for me to understand? And then allowing that conversation to kind of do that for you. That definitely was the case on the second topic I did, but I don't want to monopolize all the time here, but I definitely want to talk about it because the second topic I used was from our friends at Sakana.ai, which you've heard us talk about Sakana before on the show. And you just go to their website and they have really, really cool articles about stuff they're doing that's really amazing. And so they have this new TAID method. And I'll just say what it stands for. We'll talk about it when we come back to it, but temporarily adaptive interpolated distillation. That's not daylight savings time. And also that article came out in Japanese on their website. I had to translate it through Google Translate on January 30th. So I was like, let's test the models and find out who can accurately talk about this 7-day-old research paper that came out that was originally written in Japanese. Let's see what happens. And so we could talk about that here in a little bit. Also, because Sakana is awesome, fascinating to learn about TAID, but that's a whole other show. But we'll get to it in a little bit here. Karl, I know you joined us a little bit ago. We've been talking about obviously deep research, and I think there's a little bit like Andy, I hear you because you're like, well, part of deep research could also be the deep thinking side of it and what that brings back in the reasoning side. But Karl, have you had an opportunity to like sort of play around more with what they're considering deep research? Because right, the understanding is that's only available currently at the pro level, correct?
Yes. So I've my entire AI use now has been pretty much the O1 Pro, O3 Mini High, and Deep Research. I just do not go to any other models or Deep Research with GPT-4o just because I can use Canvas. Because I was trying to do a client thing with Google's deep research, and it can take more sources, but that reasoning gives the extra pop that I want to understand what I'm trying to do. And I think there's two things what I've noticed too, and I think Ethan Mollick actually had a good point on this. So deep research for OpenAI is really good at analysis. Like when you actually give it stuff to analyze, what I was talking about yesterday, where it analyzes data and content, and then if you give it a little bit more complex. So if you're just trying to get as much sources and data, acquire information, then I think Google would probably give you the most. But if you want an actual analysis of data to come up with actual reports that meet a certain thing that you're doing, I would say um, OpenAI's deep research is much better at that. Um, just because, yeah, like, for example, there was one, the request I had was, "Hey, I need you to go to all these websites. I need you to I need you to search all the job descriptions from all these websites. Give me the job description, the company profile, the name of the this specific type of job, and give me a report on that." I ran it multiple times on Google research. It gave me lots of jobs, not the specific job I was looking for. And its report was, well, pretty decent, but it wasn't specifically what I was looking for. I ran the same thing, GPT-4o, deep research. It, it honed in exactly what I was looking. Here's the job type. Here's what it is. Do you want the salary ranges too? It's like, sure. And it gave me the salary ranges. So it understood the instructions, which is a little bit more complex than what Google does, which is a lot of research, but may not, without that reasoning component, it doesn't meet what I was trying to do. So two different use cases though.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out.
So is that like if we like we're halfway through or 2/3 of the way through, depending on what
Hopefully 2/3.
feel about today's discussion? Um, are we landing on the idea that if you have access to OpenAI's deep research, that may be best for that context? And do we have a consensus? Because what I'm hearing is that it's still use case based. If I want if I want to get more into helping plan the research and have that kind of back and forth, that is a Gemini thing. If I want to have ongoing, I'm building it as I go through because I have more questions. That's a Perplexity space thing, and Storm is very, very academic. That's what I'm hearing. Is that what everybody else is coming to?
Well, I want to point out, and I'll just start up on the screen really quick. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm pulling up the right one here. What Karl is suggesting of layering research and reasoning, you can do right now with Perplexity Pro. So the way you would do that, this is the exact same concept, right? I put the exact same query in there about daylight savings. At the top, we get the same level of 34 sources of research. But then I've added into it, which is just a drop down. You can add it. You can either use R1 or O3 at the moment, but let's use DeepSeek's R1 reasoning. And then after it does the research, then it layers on the reasoning. Now, I don't know how much reasoning is valuable, to your point, Beth, for this particular use case. I think what Karl's pointing out shows better use cases for this. But since this is the one we use, you can see here, after it did all the research, it starts with the beginning analysis. Okay, let's tackle this query. The user wants a research paper based on making daylight savings, blah, blah, blah. The idea is often mistakenly credited with Benjamin Franklin. So you can see in its reasoning model, it is knowledgeable about the research because it's using the research in its reasoning, right? It's a two-step process. And then we can say it's talking about Germany. Now let's argue making it permanent. There's health and safety arguments. So, what do we need to do here? There's some energy savings. There's public opinion. Putting it all together, the paper should structure the origins, then present the economic, health, safety, and public and support points, address counter arguments briefly, but emphasize the positives, use citations from the sources provided back with each claim, and then it says wrapping up analysis. And then we do get a different answer from Perplexity. But I just wanted to point out that it is possible for $20 a month, not 200 currently that you would have to pay for what Karl was showing to get deep research. And then we're going to get that. I realize we're going to get that from the Plus account. So that will trickle down to the $20 a month. But currently, right now, if you're using Perplexity Pro, you can do basically the same thing. And it's very high.
So there's a distinction though, and that is, yeah, Perplexity does the retrieval of the sources and then applies reasoning to the analysis step. And those are two distinct steps. O3 Deep Research does something different. It does it in an iterative process where it's applying reasoning to the results that it's retrieving as they are retrieved, and then it can redirect its research
Makes sense.
in order to do that in a better way. And I think that's what gives rise to the somewhat nuanced from our perspective, but distinctive improvement that the O3 deep research model is capable of delivering, that a person like Ethan Mollick, who's like literally looking at research papers all day, um, he can actually sense that in a way that maybe I can't. And so I think for most people, the Perplexity sort of staged process, including reasoning with either R1 or O3, is going to be perfectly sufficient. And one of the other things that I wanted to mention about the differences is that currently Google Deep Research, it can only have text inputs, but OpenAI can provide multimodal inputs to its process.
Mm.
And
But
also,
but only in 4.0, right? Because the O3s don't allow multimodal now.
no, the
No.
ways, yeah. So the way that it is you can use 4.0 model with deep research. The research and reasoning process is governed by O3, but then the UI presentation and the interaction is
Ah,
happening with 4.0.
okay.
So that's a very sophisticated multimodal approach. So there are some distinctions I think that really advance the state of the art, and the O3 deep research thing. I think what I'm taking away from this is really the current state of the art model for deep research, this kind of thing. Now, I'm going to put a plug in here for Perplexity though, because Perplexity presented results for me and my little query. And let me share my screen here quickly. Um, I'm going to go to my Perplexity. No, not that one. I want a window. Hang on. Here. Okay. Wish that was a lot faster selecting the share here. Okay. So here's what I did with Perplexity for this show. I gave it this query: find documentation and reviews of Gemini Deep Research compared to Perplexity Pro Search and OpenAI's newly released Deep Research using the O3 models. Now, what it does is it came back with 59 sources. It did the research and then it did the analysis with reasoning using O3 Mini. But look at the nice presentation here. Features and capabilities in a table comparing all three. And this is really quick understanding. Like, Beth, I totally get your point that I'd love to be able to put all of the results into Google's Notebook LM and get a podcast back, but then I have to sit and listen to the podcast. Perplexity gives me these tables. Here's use cases, and it gives what's the best option for academic research? Okay, OpenAI. What's the best one for business analysis? Google Gemini Deep Research, because in part you can actually deliver all the stuff to Google Sheets and Google Docs, and you can develop your analysis and apply to business processes using the integration with Google. And then for technical problem solving, the STEM orientation of OpenAI's O3. And then here's quick summaries. And then here's the key differences, multimodal input support, comparing all three. I think Perplexity does a tremendous job for people who aren't literally in academia or scientific research and needing to present something to peer review.
That I agree with. Absolutely. Yeah. If you need high level overviews of topics and really intuitive ways to dive in, and you mentioned that, like, yes, I'd like to hear this as a podcast. My my answer to that is Perplexity is like hold my beer, because like I just think Perplexity has shown over and over again that they are very fast to implement things like this, and so I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a upcoming voice model or something that maybe feels or looks like a notebook LM that Perplexity does, because they just kind of do really cool stuff like that. And I know we're sort of fanboying of Perplexity, but one of the things Perplexity is really good at is being good at a lot of things. I don't know if they're an expert or the best at any one area. That could be debated, obviously, but they're good at a lot of things. Yeah,
Yeah,
they do.
an example would be I think that they'll do a partnership with 11 Labs ultimately to provide the voice podcast type response generated from the results that the Perplexity search and retrieval collects and the reasoning models digest and then presents through 11 Labs final stage into a podcast form or some other source. 11 Labs and Notebook LM are not the only ones out there who have this capability now built into their platforms.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I know we're pushing on time here. Do you guys want me to just share briefly what I did with the Sakana one? It's similar, so we don't have to go through word by word here, but I can at least share what I went through, and we could look at the three different results and kind of see where we agree on that.
Yeah, while you're pulling that, Gareth is saying that they prepped for an interview with using the deep research. Sorry, it's white on white. Um,
You can stop my share, by the way.
did deep research on the company and then moved it to Notebook LM. So like we can do that, right? Like uh we can be our own open in Notebook LM. We can be our own automation. Cool.
Um,
Brian. Yeah. Nope. That's the wrong one. Hey, there we go.
Okay, so quick, let's be students really quick and just make sure we understand what we're talking about. So Sakana put out this article again. It came out on January 30th. I had to translate it initially from Japanese, but that was just a Google Translate, 2 seconds to do that. So this is about their TAID, which is again temporarily adaptive interpolated distillation. And what they're really talking about here is helping build small scale models from large scale models. And there's actually, go figure, right? I put this through Storm, Gemini, whatever. This article does the best job of explaining any of it. So honestly, if you are interested in this topic, just go to sakana.com. I'm sorry, to sakana.ai. And this article is better than any of them anyway, but this is what basically we're talking about. What happens in standard training when you're talking about a large model teaching a small model, which is oftentimes how it happens, is you would have standard training. The teacher says, like, it's AI, it's AI. Okay. Now, knowledge distillation or KD or some other models, the teacher is saying, like, it's AI, but let me also explain to you why machine learning might be a solution, or LLMs. And it's not only training the model, they give a good way, but it also teaches the way of thinking of the teacher model and the student model. You might be thinking, oh, well, that's great. That's a great distillation from the teacher, the large model, to the student, the small model. And what this is basically saying in this TAID proposal is they put an intermediate teacher in there, much like we might do in real life, where there's somebody who during the process of training, because there's a fall off apparently in data if you continue to use that other distillation model. And so now that what they've done is they put this temporary teacher in the middle between the main teacher and the student that's able to better understand and explain. It has just enough knowledge from the teacher side and expertise, but it also understands what the student side, the small model, needs. And so they have said, and they've done some models of predicting here and said that the TAID actually does a better job as the teacher size grows. That's the large language model, but it actually doesn't fall off. The student model, the smaller model, which they call, what do they call this? Tiny Swallow, 1.5 billion. That model actually maintains and continues to get better despite the large language model growing from 420 million parameters to 6.9 billion parameters, the small model actually improves along with it. And apparently, this is something that has not happened. And this is a problem that they're trying to solve. Again, we love Sakana. So, threw this into all three of them. We'll just show this really quick. So, this was Perplexity. Can you tell me more about TAID? And it did come back. It did give me some cited sources here. Basically, went to archive .x or archive, whatever it is, however you say that website. And it pulled it in from there, which is true. Sakana did put out a full research paper on this. So it's not wrong that it didn't go to the website, although I found that interesting that it didn't go there. It probably pretty much used that as its main source all the way through its answer. Again, not wrong. Shows us practical implications and application methods. By the way, none of these, again, are as good or easy to understand as the actual article from Sakana. Factoring the fact that it was translated from Japanese is actually much better. But this is basically what we would get and explain or get from Perplexity. As we saw before, this is what we're getting from Storm. It's good, but it's almost goes over my head, whereas I felt like the Sakana didn't. It gets really, really complicated in here in background, but it does a good job of talking about student and teacher, all the stuff I just said, and explaining how it moves from one to the other and the flexibility of having a TID model. Tells you about the overview, the dynamics, distillation process. So it is a really, really good research paper. I mean, it's really good. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of this, there's plenty of different cited sources along the way. And then Gemini, as you would expect, did a great job as well. Again, diving deep into this understanding of something that really only has come out in the last 7 days, but it was able to go and find multiple different sources at where it's talking more about distillation versus just the TIID. So it's bringing in more background information. Whereas I felt like Perplexity was like, well, this is where I found it. So this is what I'll answer on. Gemini tended and Storm tended to look and say, well, let me have a better understanding as well of actual distillation and where it currently is, so I can explain and write a paper based on how TID is actually different than that. And again, we can see if we go up here, we can see the whole process for what it was going to reach through, and we could decide whether that's good or bad, and so on and so forth. So sort of a very fast share there, but wanted to just use a example here, a use case of doing research on something there's not particularly a ton of information about, and how would these different models go about it. I think Perplexity did exactly what I would expect. High level overview, told me what it was, focused almost directly, exclusively on that archive model. But you saw something different with both Storm and Gemini, where if you really got into the citations, it seemed to go and research broader concepts that may affect the smaller concept of TID. And that's actually what you would, I think, want in a research paper if you were going to write that. So definitely, I don't know which one I think is better. I didn't read them that detailed, but both Storm and Gemini, I would say in this case, did a really good job.
I'll make one other distinction across these various models. The OpenAI approach to reasoning included in the whole research process does make that a much longer response time. This can run up to 30 minutes in some cases, depending on what you're asking it to do. Perplexity will never, you know, do that. Perplexity is going to give you a very fast response, and literally within 1 minute. Right? It's never going to wait longer than that. And I think Gemini Advanced is probably similar to OpenAI in that, depending on the complexity of the and extent of the research it has to do, it could take many minutes for it to come back. But again, we're talking about something that would take a real human researcher weeks to do.
Yeah, in all
So
cases here, right? I mean, how much time did this say? I'm like, oh, this one took 3 minutes. This one took 4 minutes or whatever. You're right. And it's quick to point out any of this 40 sources. How long would it just take you to research 40 sources, good or bad?
so
It's a huge time savings.
So this actually brings us to something that I think is a distinction that we're skating over, and I want to name it. And that is, are you doing research for business or are you doing research for academics? Because if you're doing research for academics, being more involved in that back and forth and having to say, okay, but what about this? Let's go to that third resource. This was my impression from that paragraph. Like, or having the AI prompt you, which is really the ideal situation, is that the AI is helping create that struggle that is necessary for actual acquiring education and wisdom. Or are you in a position where you don't actually need to know everything about that business because you have a tool that helps you understand what you need to know about that business? And therefore, it's great, right? Like, totally. Do not make me struggle for this answer. Go ahead and distill these 40 sources and bring me back. And I think we are addressing two separate needs, and models are pointing one way or the other depending on what your end result, what you want your end result to be, both for the product of the research and also the skill building of the person who's doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that makes sense. Um, I was gonna wrap up here. I know Carl, you just popped back in, but did you have anything else do you want to add real quick, Carl, before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I think what I I do believe this does keeps the pace of change moving, but also to think about it now for 20 bucks a month, or if you really want to go 200 bucks a month, I think from a business perspective, y- this is should be table stakes now. Like,
Mm.
I would say you should have this because you're researching market analysis, prospect research, whatever, just makes everything faster. And I do believe this is an example of how, from a productivity efficiency perspective, you would be, it wouldn't make any sense not to have it, but has deep impacts on people. Like, you do not need, for certain positions, a mid-level analyst, because these things are better than that mid. For a lot of mid-level analysts, you don't need that. So
Right.
what happens now? Like, for me, this is like one of the true pieces of, hey, this is a disruption to the job market because that thing can do faster, better research than some of the humans out there.
Right. There's a meme of a conversation, of a text conversation. I don't know if it was invented for that or whatever, but it doesn't matter because if it's not real, it is still real. And it says, my boss just got the $200 pro subscription for OpenAI. And the friend says, "You're fired." And the response is, "They can no longer justify my salary." Right? And that is like, yeah. No, we're coming close to those kinds of conversations. I do wanna say, because 'cause we've referenced the OpenAI, this is gonna come to Plus. What they've said about it is it's coming to Plus when they can figure out to do a less expensive version than what the Pro people get. So I often think that less expensive in this context means maybe not quite as detailed, right? So just a heads up about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with all or everything you guys are saying as far as like the business use cases and stuff. Carl, you were just pointing out, or you know, using it for business and how jobs would be disrupted. Beth, you just said the same thing. The one that came to mind for me is I was just recently talking to Jake, who's the CEO of my company, and we were talking about account plans, and he said, account plan for a sales rep or a sales manager is a deeply like painful process. It's like 15 to 20 hours. And we were conversing about that. And the reality is when you look at this reasoning and research and then add that to like RAG and background knowledge on a company, an account plan will not only be something that takes a matter of minutes, it'll actually just be something that's updated in the background with any user involvement. In other words, if you have a long-standing client and you're like, how are we going to grow? An account plan would be like, how are we going to grow this client by 20x over the next 12 months? Who do I need to meet with? How do we grow it? How do I tell them about our other products and service? All that, right? That's an account plan. That's just going to be something that when you go look at that account in like whatever the CRM version is, that will just simply be there. It'll be like, this is the updated. Oh, you just had 5 more meetings? It's updated. Oh, you just had a Zoom thing? It's updated. Don't worry about it. By the way, they just had a huge valuation and they got a Series C or something like that. We've updated your account plan. It'll just do. This 15 hours of pain of putting these together from a static standpoint that could be out of date tomorrow, depending on what happened with that client and the next conversation in the future, this will just happen. And that's definitely going to disrupt jobs because there's people who actually do this now. And it's just going to be there. So, all right, we got to wrap this one up. But don't forget, tomorrow is our 2-week bi-weekly recap show. What does that mean? Well, that just means we're going to talk about today's show, yesterday's show, and everything else we talked about over the last 2 weeks. It gives us a really great opportunity to stop, pause, and not necessarily, we're not always reflecting and saying the same things we talked about. It's really just to add back to the conversations that are happening. AI moves so fast that this is sort of the breaks for us that we're able to say every 2 weeks, hey, hold on, what just happened? And where do we need to add in more context to and stuff like that? So make sure you come back tomorrow. It's always one of my favorite shows. I say that every single time. But appreciate you doing it. Thanks. Like, subscribe. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you've never met us before, we're here every day, weekday, that is, at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can go to dailyAIshow.com. And if you're interested in signing up for the newsletter, it is completely free and it goes out every single Sunday. And you can see that as like an add-on, a bonus of the kind of content we put out, but it's got even more in it. So we can reach people that way as well. So that's it. Have a great day, and we will see you back tomorrow for our bi-weekly recap. Till then, bye, Rick.